about a topic that Zach and I have written a book about to some degree. Um, it's called Outgrowing Addiction, but it has a strong component about child rearing in it. And Zach is a developmental professional, that's his business. And I'm a person who, unlike I think virtually anybody else in the addiction field, relates upbringing to addiction. For example, Zach and I both love Carl Hart, and Carl Hart says only a small minority of people become addicted to drugs like meth or heroin when they're exposed to them. And then he just punts. He says, well, there's something wrong with them. You and I talk about how a child can be raised to be more or less likely to become addicted. And another topic we often talk about is emphasizing trauma is not the optimal way to go. And quite a bit of research shows that. On the other hand, a child experiencing success and accomplishment does learn a lot. And so if I were to title what we're doing here, it's How to Raise a Non-Addicted Child. And the subtitle would be Accomplishment is the opposite and a more powerful experience than trauma. So let me start by describing a hit television program, which is unbelievable to Americans. And it's a Japanese program called Old Enough. Mm. And it's been produced for decades in Japan, and it's a big hit in Japan. And for whatever reason, during the pandemic, Netflix brought it over to America, and it became a surprise hit here. Old Enough, what do you think that show is about? Parents send a kid out, a small child out, on an errand, while a cameraman goes along at a distance and records the child's, and I'll use the word miscues, because most 5-year-olds won't go directly to do the task correctly.
I was going to mention it's not just kids; it's like toddlers. Yeah.
Well, toddlers. I'm going to give an example. He's 5 years old. I'll just describe it. It so happens this isn't always the case. His mother sends him out to do some shopping for dinner. It so happens that she has an apartment with a balcony where she can watch him go around the corner to the bakery and the supermarket. And I'll give away the plot. He comes back twice empty-handed. And his mother's up there in the balcony watching him, and she's going, well, she doesn't say oy vey, she's Japanese. But she's saying, oh, God, he's coming in, he doesn't have anything in his hands. This hasn't worked. Let's jump to the end. He has to go back a third time, and he successfully buys up, well, I don't know what the food is, some kind of a vegetable. Like, for example, the first time he comes back, and his mother says, well, buy one package of the vegetable. Let's say it's asparagus. And he comes back and he says, well, there were 3 asparagus in the package, so I couldn't buy it. So his mother has to explain to him, well, I meant 1 package. After he buys it, he gets some change in coins. The Japanese, they don't rush to help a 5-year-old shop, but they give advice. The lady at the cash register, the cameraman's behind her, says, well, be careful with the coins. And of course, he drops the coin. He has to go to the bakery now. And he drops the coins. And somebody at the bakery helps him pick them up. And he buys a special kind of bread he likes. And then he gets home and he succeeded. Can you imagine what that interaction's like, how he feels and how his mother feels? Zach, can you imagine what that interaction is like after he successfully returns with the food for dinner and the mother greets him?
I can. That's like, it's right along with what's her name? Carol Dweck's growth mindset, because the toddler just went out and did something that's like astronomical. That's like, I just went out in the real world and did an adult thing, came back, and there's nothing but celebration. And it's not a gratuitous fake celebration. It really is exciting for the parent and the kid. I have a daughter, and she's not quite 5, and it's big for her when we're in the grocery store, and I send her on a mission. My wife doesn't really like doing this, so it's she and I do it together. But send her on a mission to some other aisle and say, "I need this product. Go look for it." And she'll go sometimes empty-handed, sometimes not. We haven't done the experiment of sending her down to a grocery store on her own yet, but I could imagine her going there, coming back, and it just being like, lighting up.
Let's go take what you just said and take it in two directions. They quote the kid, he's speaking Japanese. They have, whatever. So you'll know. He said, I did it. I did it. I'm 5. And I actually wouldn't know what he means. Does he mean I did it, but I'm only 5? Or does he mean I'm a big boy? I'm 5. I did it.
Right.
And his mother's glowing and she says, dinner will taste even better. Because he's going to eat dinner. When I went with my grandson to Idaho, we fished and then we ate the fish. Now, you talk about why do Americans love this show? Nobody in America would ever send their 5-year-old to the grocery store shop. And
it's like not even real. It's like total fantasy.
And it's like it's probably illegal. I mean, if they found your 5-year-old at the supermarket, they'd probably come home and arrest you or something. They'd talk to you. So people are right. They're watching this show. They love it. They perceive the advantages of it, and they would never do it themselves. And if you were to ask an American watching this show, why do you love it so much? But you would never send your 5-year-old or 6-year-old or 7-year-old to the grocery store alone. They would say something like, well, in America, the kid would get kidnapped and raped. And so you might say, really? Well, how come the kids in Japan don't get kidnapped and raped? And they'd probably say something, well, people in Japan are well behaved. And then you might say to this person, now I'm imagining this person, if you saw a kid alone shopping, would you kidnap them? And the person will say, any person would say, what are you, crazy? What do you think I am? I'd go up to the kid and I'd say, what are you trying to do? Or what shop are you looking for? Kids often get lost doing this. And he'd help them out. So part of what the kid is learning is pride, contributing to the household, and also that people are helpful. You're going to meet people out there. And one of the things we've talked about is how American children are almost totally isolated now and interact even with their friends strictly through electronic media. So now let me switch to a personal story. This is from my memoir, A Scientific Life on the Edge. My Lonely Quest to Change How We See Addiction. I'm a pretty strong-willed person. And in my memoir, I talk a bit, well, how did I get this way? And I had a old enough experience that didn't go exactly like the TV series. My father had a small shoe store underneath the elevated train. It's called the Frankfurt L in Kensington, Philadelphia. And ironically, Kensington, Philadelphia is now famous because it's reckoned to be the heroin addiction and opioid addiction and overdose capital of America now. And I hung out there. It was a working class neighborhood then. Drugs were not an issue. So my father had a shoe store where he sold cheap shoes. And he was looking after me for some reason. I was 6 years old. And my father had run out of 2 of his types of shoes. And my father came up with this plan. The jobber, the dealer who sells him shoes, was on the same Kensington Avenue, 2 subway stops down. My father gave me $2 bills and 2 quarters and told me to go to the jobbers and take a cab back to the store with the 2 boxes of shoes. So I just so happens I described this to a very independent woman I know just this weekend, and she laughed and smiled. And I said, well, would you ever do that with your kid? And she said, never, never. And I know it's hard for people to believe. I'm 77. When I was 6, we didn't have cell phones. So my job was to go to the end of the block where there was an elevated stairs to the elevated, to go 2 stops. If I didn't get off at the right stop, Philadelphia is a very physically large city. The elevated goes underground, becomes the West Philadelphia subway, and you end up in another world. I mean, you'd be lost forever, like spinning off in a spaceship. However, I got off in 2 stops. I put a quarter in the subway token machine. The jobber was right on Kensington Avenue. I could see them. The guy was looking for me. He beckoned to me. He called a cab. He put 2 boxes of shoes in the back of the cab, in the trunk. He gave the cab driver the address. Who knows? I might have screwed up if I had to give the exact number. We went to my father's store. The guy opened the trunk, took out the 2 boxes. My father came out and brought the boxes in. And the guy had a meter, and the fare on the meter was $2.25, which is all the money I had, which I gave him. All right. Now here's my trauma, Zach. When I went inside, my father said, did you tip the cab driver? And I said, no. The fare was 2.25. That was all the money I had, so I could only pay the fare. And my father, his entire reaction to this situation was to say to me, what did you do? Go by way of Japip? So not only did my father not praise me, well, that was a good job, son. He criticized me as though I allowed the cab driver to kind of like rook me. Although, if that were true, the only consequence was he didn't get a tip. I mean, right. I gave him the 2.25 one way or the other. So was I traumatized by that, Zach?
You don't appear to be.
Why would, I don't know. You know me a little bit. You didn't know me when I was 6. Your father might not have even been born then. How do you think I reacted given the way that you know me, or the way I am, or the way it turned out? What would you say my reaction was?
I imagine you taking the jab. You maybe didn't like it, but I also imagine you enlivened by some of the experiences and the learning that happened along the way.
I still remember it.
Do you remember it for the positive? I mean, you remember it all, but do you? I mean,
I remember it for the positive. The same way the kid said, "I did it. I'm 5." I thought, "Damn it." Well, I didn't think, "Damn it." I said, "Wow." Well, I had never taken. When does a 6-year-old take a cab by themselves? I had never taken a cab before. I'd never gone on the subway by myself before. I had done all of these things, and I brought the boxes of shoes back to my father. He's going to sell those shoes, and that's how we eat. That's how
I can actually imagine that not making such a big deal out of it was actually more helpful in having you get something from the experience. It's one of the things that I won't go too far into this, but one of the things in schools there's an idea of praising kids for the things that they're doing well, and sometimes I think that over too much praise can seem contrived. It's like, okay, you did this thing in this circumstance, nice job, it's a celebration, rather than this is you now. This is you're a 6-year-old who can take a subway one way and a cab the other way and get shoes and work on the business. This is you are a big kid.
There's actually a line of research by a famous Stanford psychologist, developmental psychologist, that says exactly what you say. When kids, if you leave kids alone with blocks, they build something. And that's an experiment. You can praise them for building something, or you can just let them build something. And the kids turn out to be more resilient around building if you don't do anything. The next time they're more likely to just build the thing. Whereas if you praise them, it's somehow, well, they're doing it for your praise. And really, the idea is for you to get out of the equation. That's where you're headed eventually.
Right.
Now, my father wasn't aware of the Stanford study, which hadn't been done then. And he probably wasn't using the best technique. But I did fill in the gap myself. I did think, I can really handle it. So I told you about the woman I met who I described that to, who liked the story, who would, I don't know, it's too late to arrest my father. She would never do it. But I had to go to the village where I always get lost. I took a bus and a subway one way. And then afterwards, we took a little walk. And I sort of didn't know where I was. So I got on a bike and I didn't know where I was headed. I took a city bike. I didn't know where I was headed. I mean, I know what subways go to my neighborhood and I know what buses go to my neighborhood, but I didn't really have a route in mind. And so I saw a subway stop and I thought, oh, well, that goes up to 23rd Street at East Subway on the 8th Avenue. I get over 23rd Street, I can take the bus, 2nd Avenue, and then I can take the Interborough bus home. I feel I'm good at that. I feel I can handle, you know what I mean? Certainly I wasn't going to panic. I was in New York City, for God's sake. But as I was, even after I got on the bike, I didn't actually know where I was going. I figured it out as I went along. And I know how to do that. I mean, it's a little, I don't know if we're going to say, well, he learned that when he was 6 and he got off the subway. But I can handle an urban environment and public transportation. I don't panic. And that's the way my life worked out. That childhood experience I had, a lack of praise wasn't traumatic, was actually encouraging of my internal resources. Whether that would be the best way to get a child there, that's something we're discussing. And our bottom line, I think, would be, which is what you were getting at, let a child do things as independently as you feel comfortable, it is reasonable, and you won't get arrested for. And don't, be responsive and appreciative, but don't go overboard praising them like it was some kind of miracle.
Yeah.
And let's make the final connection. A person like that is less likely to become addicted because they're not traumatized. They appreciate their own skills. They can accomplish a certain amount of success in life. They learn that the world is something that they can deal with. In the Japanese situation, the cab driver, he just drove me, the cab driver helped me out. He did his job. The guy at the jobber's place to put the boxes in the car, nobody praised me, but they were helping me out. Everybody did what they were supposed to. Nobody ripped me off. And so I learned, well, the world, basically is a pretty good place. And basically people try and help you out if they can. You know what I mean?
There's
That's
only one edit I would make to your you kind of established terms of allowing kids independence, and I think only because you're being diplomatic. You said, let kids be independent, and then to the extent that you're comfortable doing it. And I would only argue, maybe because of where we are in America during the times that we're in, that you want a kid. The reason you want a kid to be independent is so that they can be, as Lev Vygotsky said, a head taller than themselves, do things that even they didn't think they could do. And so I would say, as a parent, educator, whatever, is a person who's has a kid's interest at heart, let kids do things that you're slightly uncomfortable with. Where's your comfort level? And then, in the spirit of letting them be a head taller than themselves, let them do things that you're almost not comfortable with. And practice that. That's the homework assignment for parents.
we have an example. You and I actually have an example of that. I brought my grandchild up to Burlington, where you are. When he came home, he cut his foot. Your lovely wife, your talented wife, Sam, there was a festival. They had a first aid truck. And when we got home, Sam looked at it and said, that's not going to work. When I got home with Cassius, it was just me and Cassius. His mother picked us up, and his mother said, God bless his mother. She said, thanks for bringing him back in one piece. And I said, he has a nick or two. He didn't have any stitches, but he's going to take off his socks and he's going to say, what the? Guess what he blared to her? What was the one thing, you're alone with a kid. You don't know. The one thing he spoke about was going out in the kayak with you on Lake
Champlain. Yeah.
And when you go out on a kayak, there's only one person to a kayak. A. B. I live in Brooklyn. We have a lake in Prospect Park. You can see to the other side of the lake. Lake Champlain is like an ocean. When you get there, you can't see the other side. And so we put Cassius in a I hope you don't get arrested. I think it's statute. He had never been in a kayak before. And you're supposed to sit in the kayak. He had to sit in his knees or whatever, kneel. And I'll jump to the end. He didn't drown. He did that on his own. When he got home, that was the one thing he told his mother. I went out on a kayak.
That's great.
Let's just say I became retroactively, what was the word you said, the thing that makes you uneasy? I went, I'm letting him go out on this gigantic lake in a kayak, but praise the Lord, everything worked out okay. And, he survived and we survived.
You and me both. I remember doing that, and he had a life vest. Okay, good. And
he had a life vest.
And when he sat in the kayak, and I adjusted the seat. There's a thing at the end that you can rest your feet on. And even when I had it on its lowest setting, he said, I can't reach there. So he was having trouble steering the kayak. So I don't know if Sam even heard me say this. You could kind of scoot up a little bit. You don't have to really be sitting. And then I thought, well, only if you're comfortable. Do you still want to do this? And he said, yeah. And so I wasn't totally sold that it was going to be perfect, but we did it. So I think you and I both had a phase where we were uncomfortable.
Your wife was there. Secretly, I'm thinking, well, Sam is a sensible human being.
Right. At least Sam's
what
there.
We're doing is crazy. She would say something, we had a little backup.
That's right.
So, okay. Sometimes in life, there'll be challenges. At some point in your life with a child, they're going to face a challenge that if it was up to you, you would say, this can't happen, but it's not always going to be up to you. At some point, they're going to have to live their life.
Right.
Cassius was older than 5 or 6, a little bit older. What age that happens at, it's hard to say. What that involves, it's hard to say. But like everything else in life, you need some possibly preparation for that. Even as a child, you have to have had experiences that tell you, the person, I'm facing a situation I haven't faced before that could have some very down consequences. You're having interactions with people. Maybe you're taking substances. It happens. And that's a critical lesson to be learned. So that's the end of the story of why Americans love the Japanese show Old Enough, even though they would never duplicate it, and how we can do something but be more than a voyeur. You can look at Netflix and watch these. What you can learn about it, given that you're not going to send your 5-year-old to buy asparagus at the grocery market.
Right. There's no competition in how you can be the safest parent, but there could be a kind of a sport in watching just how far you can take your kids' independence. So I hope with social media and communication these days, maybe we'll make something of it.
Hopefully it has a positive outcome.
All right, Stan.